Hi, and welcome. I'm the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Gaver, and thank you for joining us for this week's Bible study on the book of Revelation, chapter 12. This is a continuation of a Bible study that we started last spring, where we were looking at chapters 1 to 11. We started out, it seemed pretty reasonable. You have John writing letters to different churches, telling them what their strengths are, their challenges are, giving them warnings or praises as the case may be. And then it moves into some kind of cosmic dimension. And we've got about 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 2 witnesses. Everything's beginning to get stranger and stranger. And now in chapter 12, we really move into another dimension, and one that's very hard for us to understand, as we're going to find out. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the PowerPoints, but I'm basically asking you questions and challenging you to think. Most of today's questions, I can't say all, but most of them come from the site listed on the screen. And I couldn't, as I said there, I can't find the name of the church or the author. It's just Clover Sites, whatever, Connect Church. And the site itself doesn't seem to exist except for the PDFs. So, but they're good questions. So the very first question is, what is symbolic in this chapter and what is literal? So what chapters must be, what images must be symbolic, which ones must be literal? And that's worth pausing for a moment. I don't know of any images that must be literal, but there are a few that may be literal. I also don't know of any that must be symbolic, though it's a lot easier to find the symbolic ones. So the first one is the woman. And this isn't like any woman that you've ever met. I mean, the sun is her dress. She's standing on the moon and she's got stars in her hair or on the crown. And that is really bizarre, okay? Unless you believe in UFOs and some kind of alien creature that looks like that, we aren't taking it literally. She's pregnant, she has a child. That could easily be a literal. And that child may help us identify who the woman is. We hear about this dragon that's chasing her and they're driving her into the wilderness and she's in danger. And then we get sort of further along and you hear that this child is, well, we're going to deal with that. But the dragon seems to be some kind of force of evil. So those are some of the basic things. You've got this reference to 1260 days, which is sort of like 3.5 years. So if you had 360 days a year, okay, 12 months of 30 days, 360, then 3.5 would be 1260 days. Of course, we know the year is a bit longer, so the math doesn't quite work out. Well, the year is longer back then, too. So, again, is this a real number or is it a symbolic number? And that's a question that there's a lot of debate on. And some of it depends on what kind of Christian you are, what denomination, what branch of Christianity you follow, and how you're going to interpret it. Who does the woman represent? And the next question, who does the child represent? And who does the dragon represent? Okay, so let's stop there for a minute. We start with the child. The child is identified in Revelation 12. She gives birth to the son who will rule over all nations with an iron rod. And that links us back to Psalm 2. And Psalm 2 is often referred to as a messianic psalm, and it's talking about the anointed one. So we have that kind of reference there. And you've got also this voice saying God's salvation has come. God has shown his power as king. The Messiah has shown his authority. And you've got about the blood of the Lamb. So all of this sort of wraps around to Jesus fairly clearly. So now we can go back to say, okay, the woman who gives birth to Jesus must be Mary. And you will see pictures of Mary with stars in her crown, and somehow as a celestial Mary, being the mother of God. She can be elevated quite highly. But as I said, you're not going to see a woman looking like that. So there's maybe it's not the woman and Mary, and also this idea of being driven into the desert, into a wilderness, and she gives birth to the son. The child snatched away up to heaven to be with God, so it's protected. That could refer to Jesus's ascension. And then she's driven into the wilderness for a time. And you're going, well, there's no tradition of Mary being driven into the wilderness. So are we still talking about a real woman? And so you start getting, well, maybe we're talking about Israel, because Jesus is descended from Abraham and David. So Israel is being persecuted by the dragon, or maybe it's even the church, except the church can't give birth to the Messiah. It's sort of the other way around. Realize that all three of those possibilities are possibilities, and there could be more. That's how symbols work. They don't have to have a one-to-one correlation. They can be very fluid, and here they're going to be telling you this story, but over here they're telling you a slightly different story, and you need to sort of wrap your head around it. It can get very, very confusing. So we're not sure about this woman. The child, everything seems to point that it's Jesus. What about this dragon? And we've got some description of horns and heads and crowns, and people have tried spending, okay, this refers to different countries and maybe the European Union, and maybe it's this, and maybe it's Russia, and trying to identify. But I don't think we need to go that far. It's clear later on here is the dragon is Satan, and he declares war on heaven, and he's thrown to the earth. And that is something that's very intriguing. Satan being thrown down to earth, it can represent, in a sense, that whatever is going on is limited to earth. The rest of the heavens are going to be basically clear. And so this huge battle between Satan or the dragon and even the stars that get thrown down to the ground is limited to here. And if you're interested in that idea, you could read C.S. Lewis's books. There's Voyage to Venus, where he finds sort of, if he goes to Venus and discovers paradise, what would have happened if Adam and Eve had not given into Satan? And the first book of the series is Out of the Silent Planet, where is somehow Satan is trapped on Earth and can't get out, and the angels who live outside of Earth are all very curious because they don't know what's been going on. That doesn't quite stand up to what the Bible says, but again, it's this whole idea of evil is being concentrated here. But there's more going on there. So stop and think what's going on. Satan, the forces of evil, are challenging God. Okay? They're accusing God. They're accusing us of all sorts of crimes. God was wrong to have created human beings. That's sort of the big charge. God has made a mistake. And they're challenging God and attacking God and questioning God. And suddenly you've got this huge battle going on, erupting in the heavens. But you know what? It's between God's general, the Archangel Michael, and Satan. And even there, you think they're balanced, Satan gets kicked down to earth. God's not even in the battle yet. Satan has no power over God. So stop and realize what that means. And what's been happening in this book. People are suffering. Bad things happen. Whatever happens, whether you're being persecuted for your faith, whether you're having problems in life, whatever's going on, we tend to suffer. And we're like, is this what God wants for us? Is this whatever? Has God abandoned me? Has God forgotten me? All of those types of questions. And here it is in chapter 12. It's basically saying, no. Your troubles, whatever you're going through on your life here on earth as an individual, is really part of this huge conflict between Satan and God that's taking place not just on earth, but in the heavens itself. Your suffering is being transposed or being woven into the story of this bigger narrative. We are into a fight between good and evil. And good, God, and also everything good in life, everything godly, healing, perfect, beautiful, whatever you want, however you want to describe paradise. You've got that on one side. And on the other side, we have evil, all the destructive things that happens in the world, in our lives. And now our bodies, ourselves, are part of this battlefield between good and evil, just as everything in this planet. Okay. And so when you're tempted to give up, realize it's not you. It's not your life. It's part of this bigger connection that's going on, this bigger conflict. This question here is, who has conquered? And in verse 11, basically our brothers won the victory over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the truth they proclaimed. So now this cosmic battle between Satan and his armies and God, Michael and his armies of God, we're caught in the middle. And we've got that choice of who are we? Where are we in this fight? And we can conquer by the Lord, the blood of the Lamb. Do you see the Christian church under attack around the world today? How often do we hear and offer prayers for church? And how often do we see the dragon making war with those? Okay. So I believe these questions came from another Bible study. But they're important because as much as we have this conflict going on, when Satan is thrown to the earth, the conflict becomes part of our conflict on earth. We tend not to think of Christians being persecuted. Actually, a lot of our history is Christians persecuting others. But there are a few websites where you can find how often the church is under attack. Certainly in Muslim countries, a lot of it, there is attack there. In India, in China, in the Soviet, what used to be the Soviet Union. There's lots of places where we're under attack, but we're also under attack in North America. It's not just other religions and dictatorships that see the church as a threat, but there are people there are atheists, secular people who just want nothing. They have no use for spirituality or for God. And so they erode, and we can say, yes, okay, they took prayers out of the school. They took religion out of the schools. We can see all these things happening. And it's true, and whether it's good or bad, the answer varies, I think. But one thing that is interesting is how much we allow ourselves to be persecuted. I had a friend, and she was upset with the Muslims because the Muslims were fighting to get a prayer room, or they, in the company or in the university, I can't remember now where, but they wanted that right, that they would have a place to pray at the different moments of the day. And she was furious with them. We don't have that right. Why should they? And I asked, why don't we have that right? Why have we never fought to get space for prayer in businesses or schools? Why don't we fight for our rights? If we talk about freedom of religion, what about our freedom of religion? Why don't we fight for those rights? So there is that sense that, yes, the church is under persecution. And it may even be under persecution by people who are just not interested in religion, but we let ourselves be persecuted too. And that's another matter. And again, you're going to find dividing lines and denominations where they feel they're persecuted for this or they're persecuted for that. And it's a nasty situation. Do we ever pray for the church? Oh, that's a good one. How often do you pray for the church around the world? Do you have sister congregations elsewhere that you care for? We all need prayer. Do we take prayer seriously enough to actually pray for others and expect God to help? So those were some really good questions. So as I said, those are really good questions to ask. What we have in chapter 12 is this fundamental conflict between good and evil in our lives, raised to what's going on earth and then thrown up to what's going on in heaven. But it's a message of hope, because when the cosmic war erupts, Satan loses and he gets thrown down to earth. It makes it harder for us because he's going to attack Christians, attack anyone who stands on God's side. Years ago, I came across a book. It's called Why the Jews? I believe it's by Dennis Prager. And he says, Jews have been persecuted throughout history. Why? What is it about Jews that makes them so offensive to others? And part of the answer he came up with was, we stand for the light. We stand for God. We stand for a better way of doing things. And you stop and think about the verse in John about Jesus being the light of the world, and he's coming into the world. The world doesn't know him. That's sort of John 1. Not about him being light of the world, but other parts of the word, the life of mankind. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has never put it out. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot comprehend it, cannot understand it, cannot overcome it. It's in the Greek, the word has so many different nuances that all three of those are good translations. And so we've got this image of this darkness, this evil is dark. And all you have to do is have a little speck of light, and the dark gets vanquished. And people prefer the darkness to the light. And so they will attack anyone who has the light. And that's, of course, the Jews, Christians. It's going to be anyone who seeks to do God's will is going to come under attack. Probably doesn't matter what religion they call themselves. If they're trying to do God's will, they're going to come under attack by the forces that oppose God. I remember one movie had, I think it was Judgment. And the key question there was, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? Babylon 5 TV science fiction series, they basically had two beings, the Vorlons, who kept asking, who are you? And the shadows, who kept asking, what do you want? And the shadows they're going to focus on power. And that's what Judgment focused on too, was power. Whereas who are you is, what kind of person are you? What do you stand for? What do you value? Are you only for yourself, or do you care about anyone besides yourself? And that's always some of the questions pointing towards God is, what does it mean to be a human being? What do you stand for? Who are you for? Are you just for yourself, or is for anyone else? Those again are some questions that Rabbi Hillel asked. If I'm only for myself, what kind of person am I? So it's all of this kind of stuff is, who are you? And this conflict that's going on in our lives is this huge conflict going on in the universe. It's a story of good and evil. You say there's a battle, there's no battle. God's not even in the picture yet. Satan's defeated by Michael, one of God's generals. God hasn't seen. We don't have to worry. With God on our side, or with God in the picture, there is no conflict. So that's the message for Revelation chapter 12. Thank you. You've got the questions. You can go explore it in more detail yourself. And next week, we're going to be looking at Revelation chapter 13. Take care. God bless. See you next week. Bye-bye.